Something terrible happened in one small provincial school. The teacher and several students disappeared without a trace within 1 year. Locals began to say that the school was cursed and that the spirits of the children were returning to avenge their premature death. One evening, a group of teenagers decided to spend the night at school to figure out what was really going on. They armed themselves with flashlights, cameras and recording equipment. When they entered the school, they felt that there was something wrong in the air. While they were exploring different rooms, they heard strange sounds, rustling, footsteps and the ghostly laughter of children. One of the girls noticed a strange spot on the floor in one of the classrooms. She bent down to take a closer look, and suddenly a small child's hand appeared from the spot. Horrified, they tried to escape, but all the doors and windows automatically closed. The corridors of the school began to change shape, creating a maze from which it was impossible to get out. They heard the voices of children whispering in their ears, and began to understand that the spirits of the former students would not give them peace. The teenagers tried to use their mobile phones to call for help, but they all found that they had no signal. They wandered through the dark corridors, trying to find a way out, but each turn led them only to new horrors. Finally, they came across a door that led them to the basement. There they found a room filled with toys and photos of missing children. It seemed to them that the photos were moving and smiling, and the toys were moving by themselves. At that moment, they heard a shrill scream, and one of the disappeared disciples appeared from the shadows. He was pale and distorted, his eyes glowed with malice. The teenagers realized that they needed to do something to break this nightmare. The teenagers felt the terror engulfing them in every cell. The pale disciple began to slowly approach them, uttering shrill screams and uttering incomprehensible words. They realized that they needed to find a way to break this nightmare and free themselves from the suffocating corridors of the school. One of the teenagers remembered an old legend associated with this school. It was said that the ritual of sacrifice could break the curse and free the souls of the dead children. But it was dangerous and required courage. With the help of objects found in the basement, they began to prepare for the ritual. Everything seemed alive and hostile, and the walls of the basement seemed to breathe. Teenagers gathered in a circle, holding candles in their hands, and began to recite ancient spells. At that moment, everything froze. Their words became distorted, becoming shrill screams, and the walls of the basement were filled with shadows. A bright light flashed, and all the teenagers fell to the floor, exhausted. Teenagers woke up in a dark and distorted version of school. The corridors were filled with darkness and shrouded in an atmosphere of fear. Nightmarish visions and terrifying creatures were waiting in every corner. The first nightmare that teenagers faced was their own fears and phobias that came to life in reality. One of them encountered tall spiders that were weaving nets around him, entangling him in them until he could not move. Another found himself in a maze of mirrors, where every reflection showed his worst nightmares. The third was haunted by the ghostly figures of his deceased relatives, who urged him to join them in the world of the dead. Teenagers realized that they were entangled in a loop of their own nightmares, and in order to get out, they need to cope with each of them. But as they progressed further, the nightmares became more realistic and vile. They faced distorted teachers who performed their long-forgotten and gloomy lessons, punishing them for every mistake. The destroyed classrooms turned into halls with falling ceilings and floors trying to destroy them. Teenagers continued to struggle with their nightmares, but each step brought new horrors. They found themselves in a room where a sinister doll was painfully gathering. The doll moved its ancient parts, and its eyes glowed with malice. She sought to get their souls, turning them into her slaves. Another teenager found himself in a room where ghostly shadows hovered around him. The shadows were rising up, squeezing him and trying to drain his life force. Every step he took was heavy, and he felt that they were getting closer to absorbing his essence. The third teenager encountered a maniac who chased him in the gloomy corridors. The maniac was armed with a sharp knife and enjoyed every step he took as he approached his victim. The teenager desperately ran, but it seemed that the maniac was always nearby. Each step brought them new nightmarish trials. In this distorted reality, where their fears and nightmares came to life, teenagers found themselves facing new horrors. One of them was locked in a room with dead dolls that moved by themselves and made distorted sounds. Every time he tried to approach the exit, the dolls became more aggressive and tried to attack him with sharp needles and knives, seeking to reconnect with his body and control it. Another teenager found himself in a world where shadows became physical beings, hungry and thirsty for vital energy. They wrapped around him, and every contact with them left burns and caused weakness. The teenager understood that if he didn't find a way to let go of their grip, he would be exhausted and consumed by these dark forces. The third teenager continued to run from the maniac, who was always behind him. The maniac was slowly approaching, flashing his sharp knife, and each step, accompanied by his sinister laughter, filled the teenager with horror and despair. He understood that if he did not find a way to stop the maniac, his life would turn into a tragedy. Teenagers realized that they needed not only to fight their nightmares, but also to find a way to change the rules of this nightmarish world. They decided to use their imagination and creativity to change the surrounding reality. The youngsters realized that in order to change this nightmarish world, they need to apply their imagination and creativity. They decided not only to fight the nightmares, but also to change the very nature of this distorted reality. The first teenager in the room with the dead dolls remembered that he had a small toy flute in his pocket. He started playing a melody on it, which immediately interested the dolls. The melody turned out to be stronger than their evil will, and the dolls began to move peacefully to the sounds of the flute. He used his music to turn their aggression into a peaceful movement and created his way out. The second teenager, surrounded by hungry and strong shadows, realized that they were feeding on his vital energy and fear. He decided to use the light that emanated from his own heart. He began to focus on the bright and joyful moments of his life, and his body began to emit a bright light. The shadows retreated, unable to withstand this light, and left him. He used his inner light therapy to free himself from the dark forces. The third teenager, continuing to run from the maniac, realized that he could not escape from his fear, but he could accept it. He decided to stop and address the maniac directly in the eyes. He told the maniac that his fears would no longer control him, and that he refused to be his victim. With the confidence and determination, gradually, as teenagers used their imagination and creativity, they began to change the surrounding reality in their favor. The dolls became peaceful and harmless, the shadows melted into the air, and the maniac disappeared from their sight. Gradually, as teenagers used their imagination and creativity,